All right. We did it. We're live.
Hello.
There he is. Hi. Okay, people. We did it. We got him. This is the rarest of all the Pokemon. I've tried to get him on the show forever. Forever. So hi. Welcome to an episode, another riveting episode. I hope more people join us. This is actually this is a missed opportunity for people who have never gotten a chance to talk to Rob Winch, lead of Spring Security. Lead. You're unusually elusive. Why are you so elusive?
Well, it's the security aspect.
Yeah,
you gotta remain off the grid, right?
I guess so.
Sometimes I wear a tinfoil hat, you know.
I don't, but you don't actually. You're really sensible. I just don't understand why you won't get on YouTube. I mean, okay, but now, so now that you're on the YouTubes, Midjourney can use your face, basically, right?
Well, I guess so. Yeah.
You know what Midjourney is, right? The AI.
Yeah.
They can create anything.
Yeah. It could be bad.
Yeah. So, okay, so we're recording. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to specify that we're live from Spring 1, 2023, the first in-person show since 2019.
2019.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy to think about that it's been that long.
Does that mean this has been 4 years? Actually, that's not true. Well, I mean, so weirdly, we didn't have Spring 1 last year, but we did have a virtual one this year.
Yeah.
Which means that we've actually had 2 Spring 1s this year.
That's kind of
weird.
Unique in itself.
Yeah, very unique. And one of them was in person, which is great.
Yeah.
It's doing great.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm impressed with the turnout so far. I mean, the rooms are overflowing.
Yeah,
and, like attendance is, everyone's eager for more spring.
Me too. I feel it. People have just been so nice. So, your session today was like standing room only, and then people were in the overflow room.
Yeah,
like 30 or 40 people just hanging out in the other room watching your talk, which is why I think people should really just, if you get a chance, you got Rob Winch. Actually, I wonder if I can exit or what's the verb for that? Tweet it.
Exit.
Yeah, like
that doesn't.
It's not what I think it means.
It kind of lost its meaning there, didn't it?
I can excrete it. Yeah, so anyway, it's disgusting.
Do they have new verbs for that now?
Yeah, they really need.
What is the new verb for?
I don't know. There's no memo. Nobody's told me.
You didn't get the memo.
Yeah, it really is kind of.
This is surprising to me because you're like master of Twitter or X or whatever it is.
I'm just on the Twitters. It's a ride that I take. Okay, feature share. Okay, so, there you go. Evening. There we go. See, there's folks. I think. Well, like I said,
you might need to send out a Marco as well. Usually that responds with Polo, right?
What?
I don't know. You
Marco Polo? Okay,
yeah.
Well, if only security worked like that.
Yeah.
Actually, imagine you identify via Marco Polo. Okay, you're good. Come in. Yeah. So, wow. You're so anyway, we're at Spring 1, big show. I don't know the numbers, but it seems like it's okay. There are enough people that I'm kind of worried about catching COVID. That's how you know it's enough.
Yeah. There's definitely plenty of people.
Yeah.
And it's in Vegas, so I mean, yeah, there's plenty of people around in addition to the people around.
So what blows me away is the air conditioning systems here, because they allow people to smoke indoors.
Yeah,
which you don't see in most of the country anymore.
It is very surprising to me, walking through the casino and then you see someone smoking or smell someone smoking. You're like, right. What is going on? Like, did I walk in a time machine?
So weird. Like, and I don't know. I'm going to smell like cigarettes and I'm going to go home and my partner, she's going to be very confused. I'm like, oh, Vegas. Okay. And she's like, oh, okay. She'll know. Yeah. It just happens. But the air conditioning systems are amazing. You really don't necessarily smell it.
It's not bad unless you're like right next to somebody.
Yeah. And so that's making me feel like maybe the COVID won't get open sourced.
Yeah. Here's the open.
Yeah. Here's hoping to no open. Yeah. Okay. So we're anyway, Vegas, and you did a talk. What did you talk about actually?
Well, I talked about Spring Security 6 and how to migrate to it and kind of the new features in Spring Security 6. And mostly we just really wanted to kind of convey that the migration path is not an all or nothing thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of times you have these these all or nothing things, and it just makes it impossible to upgrade.
Right.
And so our goal really is to kind of show you that you can take steps to prepare for it first, and then after you've prepared for it and done most of the changes, then you can flip the switch, and that flip the switch moment is the all or nothing thing, and then basically you can remove some of the stuff that you had before. So an example would be like our cross-site request forgery protection is by default enabling breach protection now. And so
we got
some.
Oh, what am I doing? Okay, people can't see this, but I, like an idiot, was just tapping my laptop screen because I'm an idiot. Let me try this again. So anyway, you got some breach protection.
Yeah, we got
hello from Nigeria.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Hello.
It's Tuesday
Thanks
morning.
for joining us.
Yeah,
Thanks for joining us.
Very early. It's
yeah.
I love it when people let us know where they're coming in from.
I can't multitask. If Josh is doing something on the screens, I'm just staring.
Sorry. Sorry. Breach protection.
So yeah, we got breach protection enabled by default in Spring Security 6. But
what is that?
So basically, breach is a type of side channel attack.
A whale? Oh no, different.
So a side channel attack, and you're familiar with side channel attacks?
Yeah.
Well, for our audience, a side channel attack is an attack that isn't necessarily in the protocol or in the algorithm itself. It's in the implementation. So an example that I like to give is there's different categories of side channel attacks, but one of those is a timing-based attack. And you've probably seen timing-based attacks, but an example would be like comparison. If you don't compare something in a constant time, can we share our screen at all?
We shouldn't. It's going to be a podcast as well.
Oh, okay, okay.
But I know what you're saying.
Basically,
you taught me about this one.
So if you compare two strings and you compare this quickly by terminating at the first character that's invalid, then basically it takes no time at all to compare two strings that have no characters equal. And then an attacker might add, say the valid password is AAAAA.
Right.
Attacker would guess AAAA, and that would take quite a while. If they guess ZZZZZ, it would take no time. If they guessed AAAZZ, it'd take a little bit of time. And they can use statistics to kind of figure out what the password is.
But is the reason there that some passwords require them to do decryption maybe, and that takes time versus they have a short circuit for certain null cases or whatever.
This is a very simple example. Typically in passwords, you would hopefully have them encoded, so it wouldn't be actually It would actually be hashed, versus encrypted. Encrypted means you can undo it, right? But a hash is one way,
right.
So we're giving a very simple example, but more realistically, it might be a message signature. Mm-hmm. So you could, the first set of bytes is equal, then it's going to take a little bit of time. The second set of bytes is not, and then you incrementally increase that. So that's one type of side channel attack. This side channel attack breach is an attack on HTTP compression. And
so that's where you can gzip the contents of the HTTP payload?
Correct.
Okay.
And so if you're operating over TLS or HTTPS, if you're operating over HTTPS, but the HTTP compression is enabled, then attackers, if there is reflected input in the response, and you might say, what is reflected input? Thanks for asking, Josh. Reflected input is basically like if you type it, if a user is typing in a request, say like searching on a search engine, they might say, spring is awesome. And then in the response, it would probably say, you search for spring is awesome and got a million bajillion results or whatever, right?
Yeah, right.
And so that means it's reflected. If they can do that, then they can actually recover sensitive information in the response potentially, because HTTP compression is on and because they have reflected input. And it's kind of terrifying, right?
Rewind. Try that again.
So if you have HTTP compression enabled,
which compresses the content of the payload,
and you're using HTTPS, which you hope is secure, right?
Yeah.
And there's reflected input in the response, which we just covered what that was.
Right.
Then a malicious user can potentially recover sensitive information like a cross-site request forgery token from the response.
How?
Well, it's a side channel attack on gzip.
Oh.
Yeah, so the details of that are probably too nuanced. Yeah, but basically it's leaking information because of the compression algorithm.
Right.
And so, we just added this default, and a lot of people are asking, well, why didn't we do this sooner? This is a kind of an old attack. And the answer is really that it's not just CSRF tokens that are impacted by this. It's any sensitive information. So like bank account information, your social security, whatever is returned in the response is, so you need to address the entire response, not just the CSRF token. And so to do that, you either need to disable gzip or basically the HTTP compression, or you need to use a plugin called Heal the Breach or something similar to that, which basically varies the response slightly so that these algorithms can't determine basically the secret information from their response.
Oh, so how does Spring Security protect? Does it randomize the data?
So that is a good question. We are only impacting the CSRF token. So a lot of people are like, well, if you're doing the whole response, why bother with the CSRF token? And the answer is really defense in depth. Everyone knows security likes defense in depth. If one layer of protection fails, then another should take over. So we're enabling it by default now. And you can opt into it explicitly and make sure everything's still working. Maybe you're storing it in session and that session's mapped to a database and the database tables are only so long. Now the tables need to have like a longer column or something like that. And so you're testing it out, make sure it all works. And then once you've explicitly opted in and everything works, you do all these other steps and do the big migration. You can remove the explicit configuration, or you can explicitly opt out of it, knowing what you're getting into, and then leave that in until you can sort through things after you've upgraded to Spring Security 6 and gotten all the goodness to it.
So you just want to make sure you can make the jump to 6. And so you're saying you should definitely consider adding that back in, but it might be easier just for the development on your local machine for one day.
Or it could be that you leave it in there until after you've migrated to 6, because there's so much greatness in 6 that the rest of your world is so much more secure. You can address that one issue later, potentially. There's always it's like, okay, well, it's not ideal, but getting to 6 is more important than, one little feature.
Right.
Especially when you're already, hopefully protecting against this for other reasons.
Right. In the token example. Okay.
So our migration guide is in the new reference documentation. Have you seen the new reference documentation?
That's another point. That's the Antora stuff, right?
Yeah.
That's in Spring Framework now too. And I think I saw
there's quite a few list of them. Yeah. There's quite a few. So Framework has got it. Spring Sessions got it. LDAP. We've got it in Spring Data Commons now. Spring Data JPA has got it. There's quite a few of the projects that are now doing it. And really our goal there is like improving navigation.
Right.
Because there's a lot that we can do with the documentation, but we really want to make sure that navigation is easier with version selection and searching and breadcrumbs. I love the breadcrumbs, honestly. It's such a small thing, but it makes it so much easier.
And a search engine that works.
Yeah. It's really nice. Algolia is, they give us free search.
Or Antora.
Antora is the documentation system. Algolia is the search.
Oh, okay. Is that a separate company?
Yeah, it's a separate company.
Okay.
So Algolia is a search company. They just index our pages and they let us use it. Because we're an open source project. Very generous of them.
Very, very generous.
Yes.
We've got some very smart people, and I reckon we could have figured it out. But for the regular person who doesn't want to spend so much time figuring it out, who would you recommend they call to sort of help with it, Antora integration?
Well, I would start with the Antora community, but we basically had some challenges doing Antora because we had some very specific needs, and we reached out to Dan Allen.
I love that guy.
Dan Allen. And if you're not familiar with him, which I'm sure you are, but if everyone here is not familiar with him, he is a great individual. I don't know how he does everything that he does, but he leads AsciiDoc and Antora. I don't know how he does it.
It's not possible.
Yeah. And he's very responsive on all the forums, but if you're if you're needing that extra attention and stuff, he also has a company.
Yeah.
And that company would, like we contracted it out, and he helped us out, and a lot of the stuff went back to open source, which is the beauty of everything.
He's super open source minded.
Oh yeah, he is. And so I would strongly recommend, if you have documentation needs, to reach out to Dan Allen.
Dan Allen is people don't know about him, but they probably do. A lot of people, I don't know if people in our community necessarily know about him, but a lot of people know about him.
Oh yeah.
Before all the ASCII Doctor and Antora stuff, he was in a past life 1,000 years ago quite visible for JBoss Seam.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Which is interesting technology, right? And he's just great. He's got every time we can work with him, I feel like it's better. Okay, so Antora, the new documentation.
Yeah.
Phenomenal, right?
Yeah.
Spring Security, is that now GA, or is it like the experimental for the Spring Security docs?
Oh no, the docs are GA.
They're out there.
So Spring Security docs have used Antora for quite some time.
Yeah.
But it was kind of like a
test bed, maybe.
It was a test bed. Yeah, okay. That's a good way of putting it. It kind of helped us find where we were struggling, and then we reached out to Dan Allen, and he helped sort everything out and tell me what I was doing wrong, and add integrations here and there. And now the whole Spring team is kind of jumping on board.
Yeah, because we've got a smooth path to that.
Yeah.
It's so cool. It's the benefit of having expertise in the house.
Now, again, I have a small confession about the whole Antora stuff.
Yeah.
My confession is I'm starting to learn JavaScript.
Oh no! Get out!
Yeah. As a security guy, that's kind of like scary, isn't it? Like, is that even allowed?
No.
Yeah.
Who does this to friends? Friends don't let friends JavaScript.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's back to Spring Security, if you'll permit me.
Yeah.
Breach protection's on by default. Things are gonna have little deprecated lines through them when you upgrade.
They are. Yeah.
What should people know?
Well, that's the beautiful thing about this is it can be incremental again, right? It's not an all or nothing thing. So You'll see your web security configure adapter. It's deprecated,
which used to be the base class you would use to sort of entry point into most Spring apps for security.
And some people, there's definitely, we're all engineers, so we all have very strong opinions about good or bad on this. But the reality is the web security configure adapter didn't really fit into a Spring Boot world, because it wasn't returning things as beans. It was just like a method that was invoked and did some things, and it didn't expose enough information to the container to help Spring Boot to do things. And it honestly led to a lot of like bean cycles,
life cycle issues.
Oh yeah, life cycle issues.
I remember you created some magic to like do lazy resolving.
Oh yeah, things. Yeah. There was definitely some things that were done that back then were necessary, but the world has evolved quite a bit since then. So
very true. And like,
speaking of evolution, what do you think of the Lambda DSL?
So this is not a new thing in 6, but it's phenomenal.
It's deprecated. It's deprecated the AND method.
Fluid style,
The old AND method is deprecated in 6.1. So we're not going to remove it till 7.0, which we don't even have planned yet. But the thing is like whatever. We're trying to make sure that people are using what we feel is the best choice. And why didn't we do Lambdas initially? Well, I bet you can guess.
Why?
It was done in 4.2.
Right. Oh yeah, before Java 8.
Before Java 8, right? Yeah. So it was it's kind of strange that it's been around that long. Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's a nice DSL. It worked fine, but I had I helped a little bit with that actually. And Eleftheria. Eleftheria. Who's the one who implemented it?
The
context DSL, the Lambda context builder.
Oh, I think that was that not? I believe that was Ria.
Ria.
Yeah.
What's her last name? Isn't it? Did I get it wrong?
I'm drawing a blank on it.
Okay. I feel I forgot the first name.
Stein. Isn't it Stein?
Oh, I'm thinking of somebody else then.
I believe so. I'm embarrassed that I can't remember her name.
Gonna be fine. We'll figure it out.
She's not on the team anymore.
Awkward.
Yeah.
Well, whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, she did an amazing job.
No, she did.
And was we talked about this, right? This is a little thing. I was like, hey, one day for Christmas.
Yeah.
And then
she made it happen.
Yeah.
She made it happen.
like all these little. The Spring team is super responsive to feedback and to input, and I would just really appreciate that.
Yeah.
That DSL. So that's a DSL that's you're saying it's going to be deprecated and then it'll be gone eventually in years.
Well, the old DSL is deprecated in 6.1. The Lambda is sticking around, so you're going to have plenty of time to migrate to it. But that's the other thing that we're doing in the reference is we have these steps in the reference that say preparing for Spring Security 7, and what that is just like, hey, if you don't want to have a big shebang at the end, you can do this incrementally along the way, and opt into some of these new defaults that we're planning for 7.0, remove the deprecations that are happening early on, and stuff like that. So
the idea is you have let's say you want to create a security web filter chain. You inject the HTTP. Now you create, in the old world, you create a WebMVC configure adapter, and then you would override the method that expected a web security filter chain. And okay, now you just define a bean.
Yes, you just define a bean.
Of type web, and you can inject HTTP security, which is the builder.
Which it was a bean itself already.
And you can inject that and use it in the same way. As part of that, there's fluid methods like authentication. No, not requests or
authorized requests.
Right, and that used to be a fluid builder. You do parentheses dot blah parentheses dot blah, and then it just change. You'd have to add different stanzas. You join them together by saying and.
It was like a closing XML tag. Because like if you think about it, the HTTP was kind of like the HTTP root element of the security, and then form login, and then under form login was all the attributes of form login, and the and was like closing that XML element, and then allowing you to configure something other than form login.
Right.
So and there's actually a blog post about it that like kind of shows the comparison. And it was supposed to make it easier to transition from the XML to the Java config, which I think it might have helped some. I think I think everyone kind of found their own niche with how they decided to use it, and I think it was one of those things that was loved by some and hated by others. In terms of like how they chained it. But how they stylized the configuration.
I don't think anybody had any issues with the DSL proper. It's just literally my IDE.
It's
literally just how do I format this thing?
Yeah, the IDE does not like.
It's the only time I've ever had to learn / add eclipse formatter.
Formatter off.
Yeah, that's like. Yeah. And if that's the worst thing I have to say about an API, then it's not a problem at all, right? It's fine. Yeah. But the new thing is just stylistically, it's just you say authorized requests and then parenthesis. Builder dash.
Now the IDE knows exactly how to do it.
Right. It's just nice. Really well done. So that's being more. It's more in the foreground now in Spring Security 6+. What else? I mean, I just feel like it's a really big release.
No, it has had. So one of the other things that we've done recently is we're pushing the use of the authorization manager. Are you familiar with that API?
I just learned about it.
The new authorization manager API, it's been around for a bit, but we're switching over that to defaults in Spring Security 6. And what this gets us is if you're not familiar with the old way of doing things, you used to have like the access decision manager, and then you had the voters, and then those voters had to get like attributes.
Right.
And those attributes were basically voted on. And then if you wanted to do anything extra, you had to get a new metadata source to get different types of attributes, and then enrich those attributes so you could do things like expressions and stuff like that. And it became pretty difficult to extend. The best way to extend it at that point was to use spell, because you could put a bean, you could put beans references in the spell,
right?
And then it was totally decoupled from your from Spring, which I love that aspect.
Yeah.
But now, if you're doing your authorization for HTTP, you can just inline a Lambda and basically return
done with it.
Yes or no, basically.
Oh, that's super cool. So that when I think about Spring Security, I think of the authentication manager on the one side, and then there's authorization and that whole morass of objects that you just described on the right, and they are sort of part and parcel of the same. You need to address both in a typical application.
Yes.
But they're not the same thing.
Correct.
Right? One is who is this person, and the other one is, now that I know who that person is, what can they do?
I could not have described that any better.
I think I must have stolen it from you.
Yeah.
So,
I think you must
have. And so like, and so that on the left side, the authentication question, you've got your. At this point, most people don't even deal with that. They just set up a user details manager or something like that, and that gets plugged into the right object. And Bob's your uncle. I know who people are, right?
Yeah.
Or I don't even, or on the other side, there's that whole thing, and it really, unless I'm using some light touch annotations for has role or whatever, I don't like to think about that stuff. It really confuses me. So you're saying you've simplified that tree.
Yes.
You can, so instead of that hierarchy, you can just use this new thing that isn't tied to that hierarchy at all, right?
Correct. Okay. And the other thing that's kind of interesting, what's come of this is, it used to be like if you had like new ways of, it used to be if you had like a new metadata source, you had to like re-implement all the layers. And now the authorization manager, if you want to plug in like the authorization manager that checks to see how what roles you have, that can be reused for any sort of context you want, because it only cares about the authentication object. It doesn't care what you're actually authorizing. So it just basically that implementation is like, it's a generic object of who cares what's being passed into me, because my context is only the authentication. So you could reuse it on messaging, for example.
Yes.
And you could reuse it on WebSockets, or you could use it on, but it's the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Versus it used to be like multiple layers that you had to like re-extrapolate everything.
So that's okay. So that is, after the authentication is done, there's an authentication object floating around.
Yeah.
That gets passed into this next interface.
Yep.
And then that's where you make the decision about what can they do.
Yep. Simple. And you might use what is passed in addition to the authentication. Like, for example, maybe there's like a
request context or something.
Yeah. Maybe there's like a URL or something in there. So you might use that. So one of the interesting things we did in this talk that I gave is we actually implemented authorization using Open Policy Agent. Have you heard of that?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's basically, it allows you to define these policies using Regal, I think is how you pronounce it. It's just basically DSL. And you say what the policy is. And
is it YAML?
No, it's not YAML.
Okay.
It's not YAML. It's not much better. It's not much worse. I don't know. But basically, it allows you to define these policies, and the policies allow you to have like authorization rules. And these authorization rules can be interacted with via a REST API. Nice. And so what we did was we basically set up the document. We tested it via the command line using the REST API. And then, I bet you can't guess what we used to interact with it from Spring. How did we make the REST calls? Something wonderfully new.
Oh, the REST client.
Yeah. So, we actually even took it a little further, and we used the factory to proxy our objects. So we use REST client, and then we proxied it. And
the HTTP service proxy factory.
Yeah.
Okay, that's nice. Okay.
Yeah. So then we proxied that, and then once we validated that API, we created an authorization manager that just took the request attributes and the user attributes, handed that into the client that we created, and that sends it over to the agent, and the agent makes the authorization decision.
Wow. So you're doing authentication in the app by calling an interface that you
authorization,
which then does a call into the open policy stuff.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
And the thing that I think is super beautiful about it is the amount of code that was for Spring Security specific.
The glue
was
an interface and some
was
lambdas.
five lines of code, right?
But
I mean, the REST API was a little bit more, but you can't, that was basically a function of like how we chose to implement it. It was totally decoupled from Spring Security itself, right? So you can't say, however much it takes to interact.
You were building an open policy client.
That's which is totally separate. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's super cool. And even that wasn't a lot of code.
Oh, no, it wasn't, because it was just you use a proxy, right? Yeah.
So cool.
So it was all generated.
Oh, that's like, see, this is what I love about, Spring Security, again, you are what, the third? No, there's Ben Alex, there's Luke, there was
and then me.
And you. Yeah, you're the third. Yeah, okay. Third lead of Spring Security. It is, for the longest time, Spring Security was the second most widely used Spring project.
Yeah.
Right? Because Spring Framework Well, Spring Security brings
in Spring Framework. Yeah, there's no getting out of that.
Yeah. So therefore, it's going to always be, there's always going to be at least as many users of Spring Framework as there are Spring Security. And then even more, other frameworks that aren't Spring sometimes use Spring Security, right? You can use it in just a regular servlet app, for example.
Yeah. And it's still very common. We still see it a lot. Yeah.
Super useful. So so Spring Security, and it's one of those things that's been battle hardened, and everybody under the sun has an integration, or there's some integration for them. In the Spring Security ecosystem. And so you've done a masterful job of taking this huge sprawling code base and ecosystem and slowly moving it to these better practices, and I just love it. I'm mindful of it. I'm starting to be able to understand cognitively what's going on, because it's gotten, bit by bit, chip by chip. It's just gotten better and better and better over the years. And it's just really, this new one is, this might be the one where I finally can keep it all in my head. Because that whole authorization bit, that was a graph
it was not fun to keep track of.
I didn't love it. But and then of course we'll talk. There's a question here, but I don't want to. We'll get back to these questions in a second. We see your questions. Don't worry, we'll get there. Part of that ecosystem is of course, when you talk about Spring Security, even the Spring Security projects maintained by the Spring team proper, there's still more than 2 or 3 that you have to care about, right? There's the authorization server, about which I've spoken on the show, and we'll talk about it a bit more here in a second. There's the LDAP stuff, right? There's the OAuth stuff, which is now merged into Spring Security since 5.0, but that used to be a separate thing. Am I missing anything else?
SAML used to be a separate project.
SAML's now inside.
And so that was one that we fairly recently updated, because it was the old community project was good for what it did, but it hadn't been updated in a while, and it relied on old SAML APIs that were no longer maintained. Right. So we gave it some love recently, and it has boot integration now. What? And I know a lot of people. I know a lot of people like, SAML, it's so old. But the thing is in security, it's like tried and true, right? Yeah. And a lot of stuff that SAML can do can't be done, via like a standardized protocol in other implementations of single sign-on and stuff. So there's a lot that's there, and a lot of companies still need it for integration with either old APIs or doing functionality that isn't really standardized otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason it's still there. It works.
Yeah.
The SAMLs, I didn't know. So there's a lot of stuff that's now available via Spring Boot, which I think is fantastic. All the starters are now Spring Security. There's integration for Spring Security and OAuth, and as a resource client, a resource server, an authorization server, and a client.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
And so there's individual checkboxes on Start That Spring Video.
And you can use those to, either the client to either make requests or also to identify yourself. And it's not necessarily using OpenID Connect. We support it, but there's a lot of places out there. We won't mention any names, but they aren't necessarily spec compliant. Yeah. And so there's easy ways to integrate with those as well. Just kind of pretending like they're OpenID Connect compliant, and adding little adaptations here and there.
That's so cool. So Spring Security, the OAuth stuff is now it's been in there for 5-6 years now, right? And well, this is the thing I think people maybe don't know. There used to be this thing called Spring Security OAuth. It was a separate project. 2011, I think we brought it into the portfolio. It's still a separate project, but it was a community project.
It became part of the Spring GitHub handle. I guess this might be the best way of putting it.
And then from there, I think it grew. It was an authentication. It was an authorization server, and there was a client and resource server support. But it was all in this separate project that wasn't maintained alongside Spring Security.
And there was also Spring Social. Spring Social, which did OAuth,
right?
Which was really good. It made interacting with the social stuff very easy. And then there was also like a lot of the integration was actually built into Boot for OAuth. So it was kind of made it challenging for people to figure out exactly where to go to do what.
Right.
And that was something that.
Well, then, do you remember there's also Spring Cloud support for OAuth?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, there was. Yeah.
There's like 4 different stories that you had to know about.
Yeah.
that's all. We just had Craig on the show today, and we were talking about Spring Social actually.
Okay. Craig, I love that guy.
I love that guy.
Yeah.
One of the greatest.
Yeah.
And so Spring Social was great, but he even said today, like the people love the APIs, the bindings,
right?
But at some point it became very clear you could just stub out to Spring Security for the OAuth stuff,
Yeah.
So Spring Security, OAuth, that all that Spring Security OAuth project. I guess at some point we said, hey, this is no longer the path we're pursuing, but it was still there for a minute. Spring Security 5 comes out in the very first version with OIDC client support. So you can set up Spring Security so that when a user goes to a URL that isn't protected, it'll redirect to the authorization server, allow you to authenticate, and then redirect back with a token. That's great. Next is, I just want to reject a request that doesn't have a valid token, but I'm not going to do anything about redirecting. There's no redirect. It's just a resource server.
Yeah.
That's the next. That's like an API, right? And that was added, I think, after the client support.
Yes. Yep.
And then after that, we said we're not going to do an authentic. We're not going to create that third tranche.
The authorization server. Yeah.
Yeah. And then people were like, "No, you are."
We would really like that.
Yeah. And what did that story look? I mean.
So, that story is, like many things, quite long, but the summary is that, the Spring team has limited resources, unfortunately.
We do.
And so initially we didn't prioritize it because it is a huge endeavor.
Huge.
A very huge endeavor. And so after we got tons of feedback, we kind of shifted resourcing around, and obviously we're making it work. It's 1.0 GA. Joe Grange is doing a great job.
Yeah. Steve Reisenberg.
Yeah, Steve.
Josh.
Yep.
Cummings.
Yep.
And we've had all of these folks on the show. This is new for you, but not for them. We had one of my favorite videos ever was with Steve Reisenberg just a few months ago in May. We set up the Spring authorization server, which is also now on Spring Boot. Start.spring.io. So you can go to start.spring.io.
That's great.
Just auto configure your way into a full working authorization server.
That's
blows my mind.
Really awesome.
Yeah, it is phenomenal what they've all done there. So, so the question we just got here is: should we set up our own authentication and authorization using Spring Security, or using an external service using Auth0 or something like that? And the answer is yes.
Yeah, so I think the thing is your authentication is really typically going to be a business requirement, but Spring Security can handle any of your requirements around authentication and authorization. But deciding what that is, it's really around the business. One of the things that I really recommend though is ensuring that when you're creating your domain models, to have your own user representation. That's something that I always talk about, because you don't want to tie it directly to the Spring Security APIs,
right?
Because authentication evolves, right? You might one day want to use OpenID Connect. Another day, you might decide, well, we actually need to also have username and passwords. And then you might also later realize that SAML is a thing for you. And then there might be a new protocol at some point that you need to support. So it's really important to not tie your users to any particular type of authentication,
right?
And B, not tie your users to Spring Security at all. And you can use the authentication principal annotation and use it as a meta annotation so that when you're resolving your identity, you have no ties to Spring Security throughout a majority of your code base. It's very centralized. And that's good, not because I want you to get rid of Spring Security, but if you wanted to, you could very easily. And what's more is as Spring Security evolves and your requirements evolve, you have a very centralized place to do that. And you're separating kind of those business concerns versus putting all the identity stuff into everywhere throughout your application.
Okay. I like that. But so I guess the question here is basically, should we use the Spring Security authorization server or an external service like Auth0?
Set up our own authorization server. Okay.
I think that's what they're saying. I'm not 100% sure.
I think that's a hard question to answer without knowing tons of details.
Also, but without knowing tons of details about what the question that you just answered was, it was a great answer.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I think context is very important, but I think Spring Authorization Server is very good at doing things that reach beyond the abilities of things like Auth0 and Okta when you need those special customizations.
Because it's a bunch of auto configs that you can override.
It's basically going to give you exactly what you want in the end if you have the resources to do it.
Yeah.
Right. But everything is about trade-offs. If you're getting exactly what you want, you are going to have to invest those resources because it is very easy, relatively speaking, but managing your own APIs versus buying something, there are trade-offs there.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of any type of software you build.
Buy or build?
Yeah.
Common
buy
question.
Or build. Yeah, it is a common question. But if you're needing things that those services can't do, it's an obvious answer to me at that point.
Use it.
Yeah, use it.
Be our guest. And from the client perspective, Spring Security will still act as a great client to any other auth service. It doesn't have to be Spring Security authorization.
Yep.
The authorization, you just mentioned the customization. This is one of those things that Steve Reisenberg made so very apparent, both in that video and in other discussions I've had since, and that has since resulted in or manifested in changes to my implementation, which, by the by, is open source because I'm trying to make it transparent what I'm doing. It's super customizable.
Oh,
every little bit about it is customizable. So at some point,
built using Spring Security, so it's just as customizable as Spring and Spring Security
and Spring Boot.
And Spring Boot.
It's idiomatic Spring Boot. So like I wanted to pull in. I wanted to store everything in JDBC.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I don't want like ephemeral session state because that meant that I had inconsistent cookies and things like that across restarts and so on. So we used Spring Session and JDBC.
Yeah.
We used the persistence for Spring Authorization Server for its client registrations and something like that. I forget what exactly, but all that stuff meant that it was all being persisted in my nice Postgres database, which is great because Postgres is dynamite, right?
Yeah.
I'm a fan. So, and that was the fact that I could just do that by overriding some bean definitions, some well-known bean types. Perfect. So good.
Yeah.
But like you said, you're in the business of maintaining your own IDP.
Yes.
If that's what you want to do, at least you can.
Yeah, you can.
And if you don't want to do it, then again, go pay
It'll
some
still
money.
work. Yeah, it'll still work with the rest of the stack.
And we have great rapport with both Auth0 and Okta. I mean, they're the same company now, right?
Yeah,
and actually Azure too, if we're using Active Directory and all that kind of stuff. All of it works great. So on the topic of JDBC, you are also the lead and founder of the Spring Session project.
Yes,
which is
I was the lead.
Right.
Marcus is now.
Oh, really? Oh, so cool.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Marcus took.
Marcus. Yeah.
Marcus hurt the.
Yeah.
Correggio.
I'm very bad at pronouncing things.
I forgot that. Okay. Anyway, lovely. Yeah. Amazing person. I think he's been on the show, but I'm not sure. And if he's not, I have to. That's a mistake.
He's around. Have you seen?
Yeah. I gave him a hug today.
Oh, okay.
I'm a fan. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, so that project is the idea. It's not. There's no WebFlex version, is there?
There is a reactive version, and so it's interesting because it's the reactive version actually plugs directly into an existing Spring API.
Right.
The servlet version uses filters and overriding the HTTP session on the HTTP servlet. Yeah, it uses the wrappers basically to make that happen. Whereas with Spring WebFlux, there's actually a proper API that was implemented by the Spring team. Since we kind of manage those APIs, I worked with Rawson on making sure that API kind of worked. Yeah, the hook was there, and out of the box, Spring Framework kind of provides the in-memory one, and Spring Session extends that so that you can get the
managed
production style sessions that you would expect.
So cool. So Spring Session it's so obvious when you think about it, which is like I want to replicate my session state. Well, Tomcat has something to do that.
Yeah.
But like they're busy building a web server.
Right.
They're not in the business of they don't have Raft protocol implementation, all that. But you know who does? Redis and your database, they all have a much better idea of how to store state consistently.
Yep.
Right. Let them do it.
Yeah.
Just delegate to an external provider of replication and state.
It's kind of the same thing that brought around Spring Security as well. If you think about it, the containers, they started off with container managed security, and you ran into, a lot of stuff that was not defined by the spec. And so you ended up with learning everything multiple times. Each vendor you went to, and
very different.
And where it got loaded was also very problematic, in my opinion, because a lot of times it'd be in these like parent class loaders because it needed to be around for multiple web apps. And so it caused actually lots of memory leaks.
Static variables.
Class loaders. Yeah, especially when you did SAML, coming back to SAML. SAML would use like a static lookup for the JVM, which XML provider needed to be used. Well, that would get loaded, and depending on your parent, your class loader hierarchy, it could get loaded from the war, it could get loaded from the parent class loader. And then all of a sudden, when the war or the parent class loader or a sibling war tried to load things, it might get no class def found errors because it's getting the wrong XML parser that's loaded by the wrong class loader. And it was, people, well, what's going on? And it was a very common problem in my opinion. So going back to that, Spring Security was kind of created to make it easy to do the same thing in all the servlet containers without having to configure specific stuff or having these shared class loaders and parent class loaders loading stuff. Spring Session's kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
You plug it in and it works the same on Tomcat as it does on Jetty, as it does, et cetera.
Right.
So it makes it very easy to turn on and off as well. And you can use, of course, Spring Data.
Yeah.
Another project we love.
Which is great at this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You want to talk to a database? Guess what? Spring Data is great. Want to persist in a database? Spring Session plus Spring Data is great.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's such a natural thing, which is because like you just said, it used to be a premier feature, a very expensive feature of like the heavy application servers. Like WebLogic had its own replication promises or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But like some would say, oh, well, I can do active or I can do active passive or whatever. And it's just like, well, I don't want to pay more to get that. I just want it to be visible across all my instances. Can you please make that happen, right?
Yeah.
Redis can do that. Why can't you?
There was a time in a past life of mine where we were using EJBs to copy the state over to other application servers.
Oh, that was your mule from one node to another?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So I used EJBs, and it was very interesting because trying to test this locally when anything went wrong was
not pleasant.
Yeah, it was not pleasant. And the people that implemented, it was one of those megacorp sort of things where the people that implemented it were just like, not my problem when there was a problem, and you're like, but
it literally
everyone shrugged their hand like,
look at the time, I gotta go.
Yeah.
Good luck. See you next Monday.
Yeah.
So little specific. Maybe you want to take a swing at it. Is there a demo? Asks our friend here. For managing concurrent sessions when using Spring Session JDBC. I don't understand the question. I'm assuming you might.
Yes. So I am presuming that they are talking about making it so that if Josh Log is already logged in to an application and someone tries to log in again as Josh Long, you can't log in twice.
That seems reasonable. Yeah.
Because you might be paying per user, and if people are reusing your password, then like they're basically circumventing shared password sort of problem. And so there's an API in Spring Security that does concurrent sessions, and there's actually some documentation on the Spring Session reference that shows how to integrate those two. It's not specific to Spring JDBC, but Spring Session has integrations that with Spring Security as an optional dependency that allow looking up the user by username in the session. So that basically allows you to know how many sessions does this user have.
Oh, right. Okay.
So yeah, it actually kind of ties the two APIs together.
That's nice.
But looking in the Spring Session documentation is where you'll want to go. And there might actually be a demo in the Spring Session samples. I can't remember for sure. And it may be Redis based, but it's using the same interfaces. So you should be able to swap out the implementations. Some of our implementations don't support looking up the user by username because it depends on the data store, what it supports. But JDBC is one that allows looking up the user by username.
So that's a good point. I know, does Greg Turnquist still do the MongoDB one?
He does.
And so
he does.
That's the Spring Session MongoDB. There's Spring Session JDBC.
Yep.
What are them?
Well, there's Redis, and then there's a Hazelcast one.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And then, you know, this might sound kind of crazy, but there's a map-based one. And you're like, oh, that's just in memory.
Yeah.
But maps can be distributed too, right?
So
there's distributed map implementations. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So there's distributed map implementations, and you can use that to persist your session as well.
I like it. I dig it. Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah.
By the way, I heard, not for nothing, maybe this is apocryphal, but coherence, Oracle coherence.
Oh yeah.
My understanding of it was like the original use case was a compiler in language.
Oh.
Not distributed systems.
Interesting.
Right. And I guess they built like a distributed map or something like that as a demo.
Really?
For this toolkit that was supposed to be like language and runtime, whatever. And yeah, like
that's interesting.
Like, I could be getting the details wrong.
Okay.
It's an apparent anyway, like a very, very interesting distributed maps. They're a thing.
Yeah, they are.
Good. Okay, so Spring Session plays well with Spring Security, as you just described. It gives you extra superpowers, actually. Now,
it does.
Because I have the ability to ask questions about its meta questions, like how many sessions do I have for the user, and not just what user do I have.
Right.
And then Spring Security. Does Spring Session play well with? I mean, it does well with the HTTP stuff for Spring Security, but Spring Security is not limited only to HTTP. Like you and I were just using it with Spring Integration earlier. It works nicely there.
Yeah.
It works well with method, like in GraphQL.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do. There's not a specific DSL. It's just using method level. Security, which is fine because I have handlers there.
Yeah.
What are the other places you might weave or use or tie in?
WebSockets, for example.
Okay.
WebSockets.
Great question. What does that look like?
Well,
Stomp and the old.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting because WebSocket is really just kind of a bootstrap thing because the WebSocket connection remains persisted until it disconnects. So there's actually it's not like, hey, here's a request.
Right.
Oh, I'm making another request. I'm making another request. Right. It makes a connection. So once the connection is made, the state is kind of maintained with the socket connection.
Yeah. But so is it?
And that's typically bootstrapped via the HTTP session.
Right, but okay, you're saying that the authentication is done on the establishment of the HTTP request that then bootstraps the WebSocket.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So there's nothing specific to WebSockets themselves. You can't, because there's no headers in WebSockets, so it's very hard to.
Yeah, I mean there is if you're using Stomp, which is basically kind of Spring Security doesn't really work without a protocol.
Yeah.
For WebSockets, I mean it can work. There's just no out of the box support for it because it needs some sort of contract to decide what to do. So Stomp is that contract, and that's the contract that really Spring expects, unless you want to kind of do all the heavy lifting yourself.
Right.
Which you can, if you're requiring that.
Which brings us back to what we were talking about like an hour ago or a week ago or 5,000 years ago, which was that now it's easier than ever to just sort of lightly pull these disparate pieces together. If the congealed whole isn't doing what you want, it's so all these pieces have been sort of
you can
unentangled.
They don't have to be tangled together.
So good. I love Spring Security right now. I've always appreciated it because it solved a problem that nothing else did. But now I feel like I have Lego bricks, not just walls.
Yeah.
This is great. So okay, Spring Security 6. What's the and all this other stuff? What's the future? What's
the future of Spring Security look like?
Or whatever. What are you? What's the next big thing on which you're focusing and that you can tell us without revealing state secrets?
State secrets. Well, can't really tell you much of anything.
Okay.
No, but I can tell you this.
Couldn't hurt to ask.
There's been this long-standing issue for WebAuthn, and I've been tinkering around with that a lot lately.
What's WebAuthn for those who don't understand?
Yeah, so WebAuthn is a way to do.
You don't know. I knew it. Get him out of here.
Well, summarizing it is a little tricky because it used to be kind of a way of doing multi-factor authentication. But it also is a way now, and that multi-factor authentication is intended to be, very difficult to phish. So like it uses public keys, and those public keys are used to sign things that include the domain. So like if the wrong domain is like trying to phish you, then it gets an invalid token basically.
Right.
So there's that. But lately it's been extended to do things that are supporting like passwordless. Like that's the new thing. Like everyone hates passwords. So there's support for passwordless also, which is potentially your primary means of authentication. So it's not necessarily multi-factor authentication. And that's probably what we'll start with, honestly, is just doing like replacement, because the multi-factor authentication also impacts authorization.
Right.
Like how do we queue Spring Security to do another layer of authentication versus saying that you're not authorized or
start from scratch?
Starting over.
Okay.
And so we do have, like there is like a little playground that I've been doing that does the multi-factor authentication thing, but it's most likely going to start off as just doing like kind of the replacement for passwords style of authentication.
That's super cool. Is WebAuthn the only thing people use for that kind of stuff, or are there other?
Well, I mean, there's definitely other types of multi-factor authentication. I mean, I'm sure everyone's used the
I remember Okta.
The one-time tokens.
Oh yeah.
So your Authy, or your and they're synced with a certain time frame and stuff like that. So people use email a lot of times.
Yeah. So
email is still a thing. Like there's a site that I use that they don't actually have passwords. They just send me a login link to my email.
Yeah.
And you like every time you say click it and you log in.
Which I like. That's actually
it's actually pretty nice.
I don't like having to remember passwords.
Yeah. And so then there's text messaging is another way, and depending on your threat factor, that's a good idea or a bad idea. But most people, you're probably fine getting text messages, your multi-factor.
And nowadays you've also got you mentioned the passwordless stuff, but biometrics, right?
Biometrics, and sometimes the biometrics are actually tied to like things like YubiKeys, for example.
Yeah. Or what was that whole thing that Apple's been talking about?
You're talking about the passkey.
Passkey.
Yeah, passkey.
Is that
passkey is Apple branded WebAuthn.
Okay, there you go. So if we get WebAuthn, does that allow us to talk to that?
Yeah. Well, it depends on exactly what we end up doing with that, but if we get it, I mean, WebAuthn that's what I was saying, is a little difficult to answer exactly what WebAuthn is, because it's kind of expanded in scope.
Yeah.
WebAuthn actually was originally started as a totally separate protocol, which I'm drawing a blank on what that name is.
Okay.
And it's been largely passive to that old protocol. But it's been extended and modified and stuff. So
if you build this, you're working on it. You're saying it's already there, but you're expanding it, or?
Well, I don't feel like it's production ready yet. It's basically what it amounts to. A lot of times when I like to do a new idea, I start with a sample. And, with Spring Security, as extensible as it is, I don't actually even touch the Spring Security code base. I'll create a sample that brings in the Spring Security existing APIs, and then I'll write extensions to Spring Security that do what I want it to do.
Plug into the well-known
SPIs. Plug it in. So it starts off looking like, how would I do WebAuthn if Spring Security didn't do it? And that's what it does. And then as it evolves, then I basically refactor my packages and stuff like that to say, well, this is where it's going to belong in Spring Security. It also allows me to iterate a lot faster because it's a lot smaller app. And anyone that wants to review it,
you might say.
Anyone that wants to review it can actually see in isolation what the new changes are versus like reviewing the entire Spring Security code base.
No, I'm with you.
It's much easier to do. And then once all that's fine, then I can copy those classes into the appropriate modules within Spring Security.
Right.
Yeah. And then send a proper pull request.
It's like a sprint, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
I do that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a scratch pad kind of example.
Totally.
Okay. That's super cool. So if you build that, if you get that to the point where you're happy with it, and it's and to whatever extent it impacts it sounds like you've been able to do it without changing or or having to exert any changes on the core Spring Security APIs. But if you did arrive at a design that requires some new interface in core, would that then conceivably allow others to then pull, like, if I wanted to like build multi-factor for some other use case, wouldn't it feels like getting it right once would give you basically the right hooks for everything else?
So yeah, I mean that's another reason why to do it this way, externalized, is because it allows me to view it in a sample, which is kind of how our consumers are going to view this. Like, is it very usable?
Right.
And so once that's all sorted out, it will get copied into the Spring Security APIs.
Right.
But a lot of times you can see like little chunks, like if there's like this little hook that you're talking about,
Mhm.
that'll probably come as a pull request beforehand, right? Maybe there needs to be a hook within the authentication manager or whatever.
Right.
We might add that hook into the authentication manager first.
Yeah.
But we've already proved out that it's necessary for the WebAuthn.
Okay. So even if the WebAuthn specifics are a little muddled as yet, those hooks can be still
those can still be added. Yeah.
Reified, cemented.
Yeah, those can be added eventually. But the reality is you can do just about anything in Spring Security without modifying the code base. I mean, it's very flexible.
Oh yeah. As he and I, mostly him, we hacked on some code earlier today, and it was very. It's just really nice to be able to pull these Lego bricks together. It was really, really, really pleasant. But on the other hand, and again, this is why I love that Steve Riesenberg. Sure. Which one's the right one?
Again, don't ever ask me how to pronounce anything.
Anyway,
there was the longest time that I pronounced. See, what was it? It was one of. Let's see, it wasn't Kotlin. I got that one right.
Scala.
I Scala for the longest time, and there used to be a rule on my like old team prior to being on Spring. If Rob Winch pronounces it this way, it is the wrong way to pronounce it. And that's why I'm named Rob, because I mean, frankly, even I can't mess that one up. After 3 letters, it goes downhill for me.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
My last name, I don't even pronounce that.
Yeah. You're still not sure how.
Winch?
Yeah.
Is that...
Oh, that's hysterical. Wait, so lost the question.
Steve.
Oh, on the flip side, Spring Security has gotten to the point where it does almost everything you want with just a few properties, light touch and Spring Boot. So it's really good right now. This is the happiest I've ever been with it. You can get really opinionated solutions that require almost no input for common cases. But then if you want to unwind some of those assumptions in the typical Spring Boot way, it works just as you'd expect as well. You just override beans and use properties.
Yeah, can I tell you one of the things that I really like about what we've done over the past few years? Is it's not just about the properties, and you kind of touched on this, but I feel like this is something that a lot of people don't realize is providing beans actually impacts that DSL that you interact with. Because like for authentication, if you expose the user details service,
it just gets
the DSL figures that out, right? And it's like, oh, yeah, I can use that.
Yeah.
But if you have more than one instance of your security configuration,
then you have to,
and you want different user details, then you have to explicitly call the wiring on it. But otherwise, it'll just pick that up by default. Right. And there's a lot of beans that Boot either creates or you can override that the DSL will actually interact with,
which I love.
Yeah, I love that. It's great.
So
it's great.
And that's I've seen, like, for example, the ability to create a user detail service as a bean that predated the new stuff around exposing the web security filter as a bean, for example. Right. But I like, it's just gotten better and better. So it's just a really great. So people are, I feel like people that have learned the old life cycle web MVC configure adapter business, they're going to feel a little perturbed at having to learn the new thing. But the new thing is actually just the old thing that you're used to doing everywhere else in the Spring stack.
Right.
So,
and I think the other thing too is like a lot of times I get the thing is like, well, what do I do now? And I'm like, well, you learned at one point what to extend web security configure adapter. Now you're just learning to create this bean.
Right. Which is it's a step backwards, and you can forget stuff. That's a great. It's like deleting code for but creases in the brain.
Right.
Okay, all of this super good. I love everything you've just said. Without why are you like this? Why not just become like a plumber or something with it? Like you're obviously very good at this, but I assume there's a fork in the road where you're like, I'm gonna worry about everyone's security like Superman, or I'm gonna just go home on time and have some job that does some like you have so many choices. I don't know how'd you get into security? Like
well, the security world, I started working in industry at a healthcare company, and they just said, "Hey, security is kind of hard, and no one really wants to do it. Do you want to take this on?" And I said, "Well, I like computers because they change frequently, and there's a lot to learn, and it keeps me on my toes, right?
Right.
But and then I'm like, and security seems like it changes quite a bit, and it keeps people on your toes. So you combine those two things, and I'm like, hey, that's kind of cool.
Never sleep again. Let's go.
And the other aspect that's really cool about security in my mind is there's so many things that you can secure. So you have excuses to like learn anything you want. So it's like, I want to learn about this. Yeah. I'll figure out how to secure it. Yeah. But before you figure out how to secure it, you got to learn about the fundamentals first. Sure. Right.
Oh, that's a good point. That's
one thing. I get to dabble in just about anything.
Well, yeah, because the Spring team, we all decided to like move forward in the direction. Okay, we're going to do reactive. Now how do you secure it?
Yeah.
GraphQL, how do you secure it? RSocket, how do you secure it? Right.
Yep.
WebSockets for the old stack and the Spring Framework 4, got to secure it. I mean, it's just and messaging and everything.
Yeah. It's so fun to be able to have an excuse to dabble in every technology that I'm able to do.
That's amazing. These projects, Spring Security and all these other ones, are, I think, you need. Would you say you've got a background in security, or you just got into it and you've just immersed yourself in it? Is it possible for like a pleb to like just
how do you become part of the security community?
It seems like a very, I don't know, don't you have to have a degree or something to kind of understand some of this stuff?
Well, I don't have a degree in computer security.
Right.
So I guess the answer is no.
Yeah, exactly.
But it really just started off with really just doing small things. I don't know if I told you this, but I had like this long-term plan of becoming on the Spring team, and and I thought it was kind of ridiculous at the time. I was like, oh, there's no way this is going to happen, but you're going to got to try, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought of different ways of this happening, and the best answer that I came up with was at the time. You remember the old Spring forums?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Manuel Jordan, everything.
Yeah. So I told myself I was going to answer one security related question on the forums each day. And the reason why I did Spring Security was because at my job, I was working on security. And so it made sense to kind of overlap those two. So I started with every day I would answer at least one question on the forums.
Good for you.
And it took, the reason why I decided that was because, if you send a pull request to someone, which really wasn't a thing back then.
Patch.
Yeah, patches. Yeah. So, but if you try to contribute code, there's a gatekeeper, right? Like they have time, they have to have time, they have to be interested, they prioritize everything. But answering a question on the forums is just like, it's just all up to me. Right. And so I would just answer questions, and I'd do the same thing on Stack Overflow when that was a thing. And, eventually I got noticed by the team, and they're like, oh, and then when I had a request to add a feature, they remembered who I was. And when I sent in code to like get merged, they remembered who I was.
Of course.
And, eventually, I became a committer, and I just like, this is a dream come true. It doesn't get better than this, and then eventually, it kind of evolved into like becoming the project lead and being employed full time. And so, I still think it's like a dream come true to work with people like yourself and the rest of the Spring team. It's just amazing.
What you in the audience can't see is that Madura Bave and Phil Webb are off camera. So when he pointed to people like you, who's talking to them.
That while it is true that I do enjoy working with them, I was referring to Josh.
Okay. And they're not actually. So I appreciate that. I'm glad you're joining the team, man. Also, aren't you the longest serving Spring Security lead at this point? You must be. Surely.
I would think so. I would think so.
Surely. Okay, question here, one for you. What's going on with reactive webflux security using server HTTP security instead of HTTP security, although 70% to 80% of the API do the same thing but have different names?
That's a good question. And the answer is really just a lot to do with why you would see a different API for the HTTP servlet request and Webflux, right? It's because you need reactive APIs in order to interact with Spring Security. And so the server HTTP security deals with reactive APIs, whereas the HTTP security deals with the servlet-based APIs.
Right.
You can't add a servlet filter in the HTTP security. You can add a servlet filter, which is non-reactive, to that directly, but you can't add a servlet filter to the reactive stack because it's blocking. Right. And also there's no HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response in the Webflux stack. And so really it's just a matter of making sure that it's reactive from top to bottom in the Webflux stack. And it makes no sense to use those, the additional cognitive overhead of reactive in the non-reactive stack. And what's more is like, you can't plug a web filter into the servlet stack because you'd be changing, you'd basically be translating the domain models back and forth all the time in order to interact with those.
So they're just idiomatic, native to each paradigm.
That's a very good way of summarizing it.
I like that. It's that time, but I've been worrying about this whole interview, and it's fair if you just want to like decline. Most people at this point, I ask as we wind down, I ask, are you on the internet and do you want to be found? I know the answer for you is no.
Well, you are there, but I don't really need to be found.
It's like, so
I'm around.
So if you are on the internet and you want to be found, where can they find you, or whatever you care about?
Well, I think I really like to see people on GitHub issues, and I love to hear feedback on our projects. If you have feedback on Spring Security, love to hear your feedback on that. I think that's probably the best place to find me.
And you could not ask for a better person to respond to your tickets and whatever. Just trust me, you're in good hands with Rob here. Okay. Anything else we should leave here?
No, I think that's probably it.
You're a hero. Thank you for being on the show.
It's been a pleasure, Josh.
A pleasure, my friend.
Yes.
How many years have I been asking you?
I can't count that high.
I've had the podcast since I started working on it in 2017, right? Or maybe it's like 18, and then we started publishing in 2019.
Yeah.
I've done the YouTube Spring Tips since 2015, I think, and then just all that time I'm like, let's do. You and I did live lessons.
We did do live lessons.
That was fun.
That was fun.
Great fun, and those are conceptually they still hold up, right?
They are. I mean,
we didn't even
Spring is quite passive, so they actually still all function the same way. Yeah.
So there's that. But of course, just read the docs. They're great now. You can even search them. So
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks, my friend. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody.